And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again. And it's wonderful to have a guest that we had 3 years ago. And now his position has changed as a member now of the European Parliament, and that's András László. I think I've got that right, András. It's great to have you on, and thanks so much for giving us your time in a busy schedule that you have.
Thank you for the invitation. It's nice to be back.
Great to have you back. So much to talk about. And in the UK, we envy Hungary having a government that stands up for traditional values, that puts the nation state first, and is happy to push back against the European Union. And there's a lot to get your thoughts on. But you were elected member of the European Parliament back last year, July last year, for the Fidesz party, which is Viktor Orban's party. I think Hungary has 21 seats in the European Parliament. Fidesz has 11 of those. And you've got an interesting link up relationship. It's not just a single party, it's Fidesz KDNP party alliance. So it's two parties in one. Maybe you can explain that. Many of our viewers will not understand that, and our American audience will not understand it either. So explain how that works.
In Hungary, we have a multi-party system like in most European countries. So Fidesz is the big catch-all conservative party in Hungarian politics, and KDNP is a smaller ally of ours, which stands for Christian Democrats. And because we've had very bad experience previously, and I'm thinking here especially about the 2002 elections, where we could have won re-election, but we lost out, and in the elections after, in 2006, the division on the right also cost us victory. We have made an alliance. This is more than just in many countries what you have a coalition after elections. We actually have a party alliance with KDNP and with other smaller formerly parties or movements which have joined this big umbrella alliance on the right in Hungary. So at least Hungarian conservatives, whether they're conservatives for because of certain social issues or economically or other, we have joined forces. We bear the name Party Alliance because we don't run separately elections. We put forward joint candidates. We put forward joint lists for different elections, both at municipal level, at national level, and at European level. And so far, this has been a winning recipe because our unity is our strength in a way that we've been able to win every single election since 2010. And the division on the left is keeping them weak, fragmented, and this allows us to have a stable majority and run a Hungary First policy agenda in Hungary.
Maybe let us know a little bit about what Fidesz stands for. I mean, what are the main parts of the manifesto when you're talking to voters on the street in a campaign? How do you present what Fidesz actually stands for?
Well, we've been in government since 2010 continuously, so many people in Hungary are very aware of what we represent and what we mean by Hungary First. So we mean Hungarian families first. We put Hungarian families and childbearing families before immigrants. We put Hungarian companies and small medium enterprises before the interests of foreign companies and especially multinationals. We defend a work fair society. So instead of very generous social welfare, we try to provide everyone with a job so they can be part of society, they can integrate, and they can make a living for themselves, and that way be dependent of the state, so no nanny state. And we want them to be able to prosper on their own, through their own work, through their own strength, and develop themselves. And because we believe if everyone is a taxpayer, everyone is contributing to the community, then it allows for a stronger, more prosperous country. And this has so far worked very well. We have had a big surge in the number of married couples. We've had much lower social tension, and I'm thinking here especially with the Roma population. The people at risk of poverty, this is a social statistic, has decreased by hundreds of thousands, and the number of taxpayers in Hungary has increased from something around 3.6 million to 4.7 million, and we're a country of 9.9 million people. So it matters a lot if there's an extra 1 million people paying taxes instead of receiving benefits. But of course, our most important, I think, signature policy agenda is our family policy system, where we support families raising children. We support young couples who want to have children. So we give them a really good loans with low interest rates, loans that turn into benefits as soon as the families, the couples deliver on the promises and the will of having children. And so a lot of the benefits, a lot of the loans turn into benefits, because one thing very important for Hungarians is home ownership, and it was one of the biggest obstacles and the financial stability of couples of having children or delaying having children. So we focus very much on this. And just recently, early this year, the Prime Minister announced that gradually, I think in 2 years, we'll be moving towards a system where every mother for the rest of their lives who had at least two children will be exempt of personal income tax. This is, I think, something you don't have anywhere in the world.
So that is very unique, and I watched it from the UK with jealousy, and we seem to have anti-family policies where you are very pro-family. How does that fit into the battle? And obviously, your time now as an MEP for the last 9 months, but there has always been tension between Hungary and putting Hungarians first and the European Union that wants to bring everyone together and make everyone the same. And how is that battle, I think, to put families first and traditional families first, that must be a fight with the European Union that seem to want to let anything happen, anything goes. There is no best model for a family, and yet Hungary puts a model forward. So what has that been like in terms of, I guess, battling with the European Union?
What I hear from foreign friends and experts is that they very much admire our family policy approach. Demographic decline is a huge problem throughout the Western world, and we're trying to do something against it. We're trying to promote solutions, policy measures, which remove the obstacles for couples for why they would not have children or delay having children. Because when you delay having children, you end up having less children than you originally wanted. So Hungarian couples don't need convincing that they should want more children. What they need convincing is they will be safe financially. They should not be scared about the financial burden and consequences of bearing children. So we're putting forward proposals in many areas to facilitate having children. And the Prime Minister openly states several times in its speeches that in Hungary, our objective is that no couple, no family should be worse off just because they have children compared to other couples who don't have children. I think this is a very important point of principle for us. And at the same time, what you see in other countries is that the governments are promoting immigration, both legal immigration, and they're also very lax on illegal immigration. We said we don't want any of that. And we've been very tough against illegal immigration. We defended our borders for 10 years now. It's one of the major issues where we have a conflict with the European Union, who puts the rights of immigrants before European citizens. So basically, if someone enters illegally, they get to stay, regardless whether they can prove they are actually coming from a country where they are being persecuted. And also, it doesn't matter if they're not actually coming from a war-torn country, because until 2022, the war in Ukraine, we had no neighboring countries which were in war or where there was persecution. They were all safe countries. So there was no reason, according to the Geneva Convention, to take anyone in as a asylum seeker, because Hungary was not a first safe country to any other country where there was persecution. This has caused a very long uh, fight with the European Union. It's still ongoing. Last summer, we received a fine of 200 million euros for being tough on illegal immigrants, and specifically, they want us to withdraw legislation that allows for the swift rejection of asylum seekers who can't actually prove that they come from a persecuted area. Of course, we push back people also towards Serbia because Serbia is a safe country and the Balkan route is one of the main entry points into the EU and therefore also into Hungary. But at the same time, we allow genuine refugees from Ukraine to enter in unlimited numbers because they are in war. And they were allowed to enter and they were provided services, information if they want to go somewhere else, what are the schooling opportunities, etc. So I think we're very principled on that front as well. We help all of the refugees to whom Hungary is a first safe country, and we reject those who come in illegally and who come in through several safe countries.
And before I ask you about your time in the European Parliament and what it's been like, and Viktor Orban is a towering figure in Europe for many reasons. And he is principled. He wants what's best for Hungary, and you've used not America First policy, Hungary First policy, to put your nation first, which seems like common sense policy. He is a Christian and a bulwark, a barrier against the woke agenda and the woke wave that has really come. And he is really the European Union's worst nightmare. Someone who stands for his citizens and not just Europeanness. Tell us about that because it's been. I mean, Orban has not just been prime minister since 2010. He was prime minister for 4 years before then, also. So he's been on the scene for decades. Um, and the European Union seem to be stuck with him. Every election, he is there. Tell us about that. What does that mean for Hungary having such a strong principal leader that will stand ground? Because it's fairly unique in Europe.
Well, Viktor Orban and the founders of Fidesz have been in politics since the end of the 80s. They've been people who were fighting against communism and the change of regime in Hungary. And then Viktor Orban personally spent 16 years in opposition. First 8 years in opposition, then 4 years in government, then 8 years in opposition, and then from 2010 continuously in government and as serving as prime minister. And obviously, this is very rare in Europe. This is the founders of Fidesz are very committed to the national idea, to national prosperity. This is also in terms of uh, both socially, both economically, and also politically when it comes to international relations. Just to get a context, in 2010, when the socialist liberal government fell and lost at the elections, we were after the financial crisis. Uh, Hungarian households were indebted in Swiss francs because of mortgage loans. Um, Hungarian companies were going bankrupt. Unemployment hit record high, and we were totally exposed to an EU IMF bailout package with a very severe austerity package linked to it. And we managed to get out of this austerity package very quickly, repay the loans very quickly. Of course, this was done with sectoral taxes on big sectors, which made a profit even during crisis. So the banking sector, telecom sector, etc. And this allowed us to have a bit of margin of maneuver to get rid of the all the dependencies related to a foreign bailout package. And of course, EU leaders didn't like that. And some of the foreign companies in these sectors didn't like it either, that they paid extra taxes. Although Hungary later was very successful economically, there was high growth, larger growth than the EU average, and there was good money to make in the Hungarian market, and still is today. And so we've had a very Hungary first economic policy. We've had a Hungary first social policy. It works out great. It just doesn't fit with the liberal, progressive, globalist, woke kind of mindset which the entire Western world has experienced in the last 10 to 15 years. We've been very good at keeping our principles and holding back on some issues like the Black Lives Matters and the kneeling it was more easy to resist because it's just not a social problem in Hungary. And other issues like transgender, uh, uh, initiatives and gender ideology, they try to import this. We've resisted to that as well, and we stuck with the supporting traditional, natural marriage. We've been able to adopt a lot of laws and, in fact, also amend our constitution to prevent this ideology from gaining ground in Hungary by defining the father as a man, the mother as a woman, uh, uh, etc., and that marriage is between a man and a woman. Although this doesn't mean that there's any kind of exclusion or um, or or anything at risk of discrimination for people with other sexual orientations. It's guaranteed by the Constitution. But it's not the priority of this government. Our government's priority is promoting couples and families who can bear children because they can guarantee the future of our country.
It's interesting also the connection with Hungary and the US, or maybe the openness with Orban and President Trump probably being traditional allies in many respects. You've had CPAC Hungary for what, three, or it's coming up again in a month for me the fourth time. And you seem to have a bridge between the US and Hungary more so than really any other country. Tell us a little bit about that, because um it's I think if President Trump had gotten power 4 years ago, that bridge may not have been there, would have been there with Hungary, but not have been there with other countries. But Hungary seems to have led the way in the rise of the nation state, in the rise of populism, and other countries have followed. But give us a little bit of an insight into that connection. And I think CPAC Hungary really demonstrates that.
The US Hungarian relations weren't a particularly important relations for the US for a very long time. We were, a former socialist country, so we were welcome. They liked the transition towards democracy, capitalism. We liked it. The US was a big investor, but the biggest investor in Hungary was always Germany, out of geographic proximity, historical reasons, etc. Um, we've always had more strained relations under democratic administrations in the US for the simple reason, especially starting Obama, they started to impose their social uh, ideologies on Hungary and the rest of the world. And we resisted that. Under the first Trump administration, it was already much better. It was much more pragmatic. Bilateral relations improved a lot. And then when in 2020 Trump lost, obviously the Biden administration came very strongly after us. So we not only had conflicts with the EU and the elites in Brussels, we also had an increasing um, pressure from Washington. They sent an ambassador who was totally out of his role and acting as a political agent and putting political pressure on Hungary and hosting dinners with opposition figures all the time, and making it very visible that he's doing this. So he was not working to improve bilateral relations. He was working either to build his own political career as being someone against Viktor Orban, or just a good progressive globalist. I don't know. But now he's gone, and now there were very few conservatives in Europe who stood up for Trump, either in 2015, 2016, and through the first cycle, or in the years that followed the first Trump administration. And Hungary and our party was one of these allies who never wavered. And we always said that, it would be best for Europe and it would be best for Hungary if Donald Trump was reelected. Our prime ministers several times publicly said that, if we had President Trump for a second term back in 2020, we wouldn't have had the Russia-Ukraine war. And so we are now very optimistic because all of this ideological strain from our bilateral relations is gone. The US is trying to stop the war in Ukraine, which is also a major economic and security burden for Europe and for Hungary also, because we're a neighboring country of Ukraine. And at the same time, uh, the US is getting rid now of all this woke ideology from government, from policies, from financing, and also undoing everything, all the corrupt shenanigans of financing political activism, political organizations, left wing media around the world, and also in Hungary through USAID, through other organizations. And now we're trying to restart bilateral relations with an honest new American administration, which wants to cut businesses which are beneficial to both sides, and wants to get rid of trade deficits. So they're putting America first. This is a policy approach which is very familiar to us because we have a Hungary First approach. But they're being very pragmatic. They are being very honest about their interests, and I think that allows for honest conversation about mutual interests and mutual values, and that's great. That's refreshing. Not to have to handle the United States from a perspective of how are they trying to interfere in our elections, in our democracy, but in terms of okay, let's look at what are our mutual interests, what are our mutual values, and based on those, we can work together. Just something for your audience. In 2022, we had a major foreign interference in our general elections from abroad, mostly from the United States. The funding source is not entirely clear. A lot of it came from George Soros and his network, and they funded our entire opposition, the Hungarian left. They joined forces on a single list, single candidates and constituencies, and they put a lot of money in terms of Hungarian political life and financing needed for a campaign. They basically paid for all of it from the U.S. This was clear foreign interference, and now with the new administration, we'd very much like more transparency on what happened. I'm working on this with American counterparts to find out how this money was spent to boost this leftist globalist network also in Hungary, and try to avoid that this ever happens again, and that this happens again in 2026. We want no foreign interference. We want to work with our ally, the United States, but we don't want any kind of foreign interference, whether it's secret money channeled through shady U.S. agencies, or whether it comes from private funding like George Soros.
Well, that's fascinating because I know at the end of February you were appointed the government commissioner for uncovering the money that came from USAID into Hungary and influenced it. I don't know if there's any other government in Europe that is concerned about that. So again, it's refreshing that Hungary want to get answers. You want to protect your system, your electoral system. No one else in Europe seems to care, and that's what really is intriguing about Hungary. Even though you're just under 10 million, so a smaller country in relation to other countries in Europe, you're principled and you know what you stand for, and you want to investigate where this money has come from, where other countries don't seem to care.
I have a different experience. They're less vocal about it, but they care very much. If you look at what's happening throughout the Balkans, if you look at what's happened in Georgia, if you look at what's happened in Slovakia and Romania, I think there's plenty of question marks. And the more I look into this, and the more I look at how the financing was happening, in fact, we cannot limit this foreign interference system and this corrupt globalist network to just the United States and just the USAID. It's a transatlantic globalist woke network. Unfortunately, with many also conservative parties in Western Europe being silent about this because they are part of the game. They are part of this globalist Western approach to international relations. And of course, they see everyone who either comes from the political left or the political right who stand for sovereignty. They are an obstacle, and they need to get rid of those governments. So there are a lot of countries which are interested in what happened and how it happened, and they want to stop this. But most parties which have a sovereignist mindset are today in Europe in opposition. So they don't have the government resources delicate it is to cooperate at government level with the United States. But we are definitely doing it. We want to uncover this whole network. And I already see that there's lots of linkages with the European globalist network, with institutions in the European Union in Brussels, and with the kind of projects they're funding, and the different coordinators at national level who receive either American private funding from George Soros and other foundations, from or used to receive money from American agencies, so American taxpayer money, and still receive these same organizations at national level receive taxpayer money from EU institutions. So as much as we see in the news how much damage the U.S. is doing by suspending these funds to this globalist left-wing corrupt network, the EU is more than keen to jump in and fill the gap, just like they want to fill the gap with the Ukraine war. So what I see is, and I'm now in Brussels, and I was attending a lot of meetings this week, last week as well, is that there is a clear intention on behalf of the European Parliament, the EPP, the Socialists, the Liberals, the Greens, to keep funding this network, to keep funding these shady projects of interference. Sometimes it's more obvious, sometimes it's less obvious, but they want to keep this going, and they want to keep this system financed and wait it out, sit it out. Maybe Trump and the Republicans will be gone in 4 years. So my job is to make sure that we uncover as much of this corrupt network as possible.
Give us an insight into what that has been like. It's closing in on 9 months that you've been there, in the European Parliament. I visited Brussels, I visited Strasbourg, both parliaments, with varying groups, and I talked to former UKIP and former Brexit Party MEPs, and it was always a struggle because they were outcasts, they were different, they weren't part of the club, and you've been there. It seems a similar battle, that you're not part of the club and you're there to do good, as opposed to just take what you can get. We in the UK we call the gravy train, to just take as much money as you can get. You're there to actually do something. Tell us what that's been like, your first 9 months there in the European Parliament.
Well, they discriminated against us from day one. Um, they call it the cordon sanitaire. So what they call anti-European parties, they don't allow to take the seats and roles in the European Parliament, which we would get based on our size. We've been able to form the third largest group in the European Parliament, the Patriots for Europe group. It completely shocked the European mainstream that we were able not just to have a mid-sized coalition, but actually be one of the big players. It makes this whole game of exclusion and discrimination much more difficult for them. And at the same time, there will be no change on the major policy areas where change is needed at European level without the Patriots for Europe group. You cannot have a common sense, sensible migration policy which will solve the migration crisis without us. You cannot have a sensible environmental policy and energy policy and industrial policy which does not put the Green Deal first and emissions first, even at the cost of destroying energy security, destroying the livelihood of farmers, or destroying industry. The EPP cannot solve these crises, the industrial decline and the energy and the expensive energy in Europe, without us. They need to work with us. Unfortunately, they're still, stuck what I call in the Stockholm syndrome. They want to please. They beg for the goodwill of liberal media and mainstream media, and therefore they are too cowardly to actually work with us. In many ways, they're also, a lot of them have turned very leftist, or at least liberal and globalist. So they don't want to work with the new U.S. administration. They don't want to work with us. So they're stuck with the same old allies, the socialists and the liberals and the Greens, with whom they have run Europe for the last 5 years. and created all of these disastrous policies with their disastrous consequences. We patriots were saying we need change in Brussels, but unfortunately, the old alliance is now weaker, but has survived. They re-elected Ursula von der Leyen, so don't expect policy change from the same leader who put forward the bad policies just a few years ago. So what I say is what I usually say is that in Europe things will get still worse before they get any better, because there's no will on behalf of the mainstream parties to actually recognize that there is a problem, that their policies have failed, and we need a new direction. This will take time, and I don't think this change will come without change at national level. If you look around, also in the UK, also in most European countries, the traditional big left-wing and right-wing parties have collapsed, and therefore you have very fragile, unstable coalitions, collapsing governments. So there's very weak political leaderships, and those who are in leadership positions are mostly preoccupied with surviving from one day to the other. You cannot solve major crises with such governments. We need stable, common sense, right-wing governments throughout Europe to bring change also in Brussels.
And it is those political groupings that do things. Fidesz by itself with 11 MEPs wouldn't have much say in the European Parliament. But when I saw the Patriot for Europe coming together, it was very exciting, with a National Rally Party with Jordan Bardella actually being president of that, but also many other groupings in that. You've got the Party for Freedom, which is Geert Wilders' party there in the Netherlands, and he's an absolute hero of mine. But then other parties that have come and built up and provided populist positions in their country, like Chega in Portugal and Vox in Spain. Of course, the Freedom Party in Austria, they won the elections in Austria and yet weren't allowed to take those positions. So you've brought together those groupings that maybe the European Parliament was not expecting. And to start a new group and to go to the third largest grouping, I think that seems to how you can make things happen. Maybe certainly for the US viewers, they'll not be aware of how those political groupings work in Parliament. Maybe you can let them know the importance of those groupings.
Well, in Brussels at European level, most of the legislation is proposed by the European Commission. They're the bureaucracy, if you want. They are the administrative body of the European Union. And then both the representatives of the national governments have to agree on that legislation, and the European Parliament. So we have national parliaments, just like in the US, you have state level Congress. Um, we have national parliaments, national governments, and we have something which is European Parliament, which also has to sign off on all the legislation at European level. So the national government's representatives have to agree, and the European Parliament has to agree. This is a very difficult and very burdensome, very long process to adopt legislation. Therefore, it's extremely difficult to reverse any, because you need to go through the same process. So it's not like in the US that, oh, it's a new majority, and so we just withdraw or change this law or that law. It's a very, very cumbersome work to amend laws and to adopt laws. So we're very much stuck with old policies. That's why we need very decisive change at national level too, and also at European level in the European Parliament, in order to bring change to the disastrous policies we have in Europe. Unfortunately, this is where we are. It's something like, you need 60 votes in the Senate sometime for certain issues to be approved, and you need the majority in the House, and of course you also need the backing of the administration. It's kind of the same trio in Hungary. You need the approval from the national government, from European level Parliament, the European Parliament, and of course the bureaucracy also has to be on board at European level. So it's very complicated, and it's a very slow and very bureaucratic process. But there's because the European Union has most of its competencies in economic matters and trade matters. for economic prosperity in Europe, we need change at all levels, national and European. Change our policies because now we just have too much red tape. We have too many regulations which benefit the big companies and stifles innovation and um, stifles the economic freedoms. We need to have small, medium-sized companies grow fast with new ideas and become major players. You have that in the US. We don't have that in Europe because of the regulation.
Yeah, but very regulated. I saw a headline in Hungary a week ago, looking at Hungary specifically and not the European Union. And the newspaper headline was Hungary bans LGBT pride events. And the newspaper was saying the EU Commission should take legal action to protect rights to free assembly and expression. And we've touched on Hungary being a very pro family, but it also wants to protect children against this sexualization, this onslaught, this confusion that maybe the LGBT lobby will bring in. Let us know a little bit about that, because what Hungary are doing, I think, is an example to every other country, especially with populist parties and populist governments. They should be taking what Hungary are doing and implementing it in their own countries. But let us know a little bit about that and that battle to bring in that piece of legislation.
Well, we had over the years several disputes around that because in Brussels, the EU institutions and the European Parliament, they're very pro gender ideology and LGBTQIA plus. I can't keep track of everything, all the letters. And we clearly said, we have in our constitution all the anti-discrimination clauses, which defends people with different sexual orientations, but we're not willing to promote this gender ideology thing that there are, I don't know, dozens of genders and sexual identity should take the place of sexual orientation or biological gender and sex. So we've had many disputes with the European Union for years. In 2021, we adopted a child protection law, which in fact banned these all kind of sexual content, not only homosexual content or gender ideology, but every kind of sexual content, which had the sole purpose of having sexual content in schools or in kindergartens or in television shows for children or booklets or etc. You have to put them on a different shelf. You have to air those videos at a certain times in television, etc. Yet, if parents want to talk to their children or take them to such events, they can. The idea is merely to prevent that children be exposed to such content and sexualization without the approval of the parent. And just recently, we've been sued by the European Union for this law, and the trial has been ongoing for many months now, and it might be concluded this summer. But what we adapted recently is a amendment to the to the law on the right to assembly, and of course we're talking about basic freedoms here, and sometimes basic freedoms are in conflict with one another, and you have to uh, side with one or the other. So we amended the assembly law, which says that it has to be in line with the child protection law. And because pride parades in Budapest have very often included people with, doing things which don't really conform with public decency, we said that we cannot guarantee that children or minors uh, not be exposed to public indecency and sexualization. So now they are afraid that the pride will be banned. And the prime minister was very tough on this and said that under such circumstances there will be no pride in Budapest. Of course, this or somehow this has become one of the main cultural events of the left in the Western world. So they're extremely upset. But at the same time, we have less pressure from the US because they're also banning gender ideology from the military, from women's sports, etc. And now we're doing the same. We're defending children against such sexualization. That includes public events. That includes television. That includes material for children in books, in schools, in kindergarten. We side with the children, and we side with to their right to have a morally and and psychologically intact upbringing, and then they can afterwards, when they're adults, they can consume all the sexual material and ideologies they want, but children rights comes first. And if parents think they want to talk about sexual topics to their children, they're free to do so.
Can I just want to
But
finish off?
we side with the children, and we
Yeah,
side with the parents' right to make this choice when they want to talk about such issues to their children.
and that's how it should be. The rule should be for the parents, and not the state to force an ideology or an agenda. Just one final thought as we close. Hungary, when you look at the religious state or the strength of Christian countries, Hungary isn't kind of seen as a Christian country in terms of maybe Greece or Romania or Malta or even Bulgaria. And I'm wondering, how does Hungary get? Hungary's got a long history, a very long history, and I know that. But where do you get the confidence to actually push forward? It doesn't come. I think the last census was maybe 40% of people called themselves Christian, and it's some countries it's just Orthodox, some it's Roman Catholic, some is Protestant. Hungary is a little bit more mixed. So I'm just curious, just to finish, where Hungary gets its confidence, I guess, for that national identity.
Hungary, Christianity has been a part of Hungarian identity for very long. In fact, it's interlinked with Hungarian statehood. We date Hungarian statehood back to the year 1000, when the first Hungarian king received a crown from the Pope in Rome, and therefore was acknowledged as a European state, as a European leader, and Hungarian statehood originates back to there. In fact, the crowning jewels also symbolize Hungarian statehood, and it's also part of Hungarian constitutional theory. So there are a lot more people who accept that in Hungary, who accept that Christianity and Christian culture is part of Hungarian identity than there are a number of people who claim to be religious. The two things are not contradictory. You can accept that Western culture is based on Judeo-Christian values and Roman Greek law and philosophy, and at the same time say you're not religious. You don't have to throw out your culture and your heritage and centuries of history just because you are not religious today. At the same time, religiousness and conservatism are connected. This is another whole philosophical debate. So I think there will need to be a religious Christian renaissance in Europe in order to rediscover what our values are, what our options are, what our identity is going forward, if we want a prosperous, stable society. Because in a society that you unroot from your heritage, from your culture, you end up in a country with a population which no longer agrees on basic fundamentals, on values, on laws, and it just destroys society, because you no longer have an agreement on what is the obvious, what is the norm, what is normal, and everything becomes acceptable. Then basically you lose your roots, you lose knowledge of solidarity, because where does solidarity come from? You show solidarity to your family, to your friends with whom you agree on values, and with your nation. And that's a basic fundamental of nation state as well, is that you think that someone I don't know but shares the same history and culture as I do, we are one, we belong to one nation. And it's the Christian value system which holds European and Western civilization together also. If we unroot, if we remove the roots, we remove Christian values from Western civilization, there will be no Western civilization.
100%. András László, MEP for Fidesz, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity. All the best.